I used to believe family was sacred, the one place where betrayal could never touch me. But that belief shattered the day my father read his will. He looked at me, his voice steady, and said, "Your sister earned it." The house, the money, the future, everything went to her. I stood there, silent, as if the ground had been pulled from beneath me. A month later, my phone rang. It was my father. "The bills are piling up," he whispered. That night, something inside me shifted. I wasn't his savior anymore. I was about to become his reckoning. It was 2 a.m. when the phone rang. My heart always raced when the screen lit up with my father's name. I answered without hesitation, already bracing myself. His voice was weak, laced with just enough desperation to cut straight through me. "Sweetheart, the bills are piling up again. I don't know what to do." My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I didn't hesitate. I transferred the money before he even finished explaining, telling myself it was what a good daughter did. No questions asked, no conditions attached. I had lived most of my adult life believing that family meant unconditional responsibility. If someone I loved was in trouble, I had to help. It was what my mother had taught me, what society praised. Sacrifice for family, put them first, always. Every time my father called, every time my sister hinted she needed help, I stepped up. I told myself it was love. But love had slowly become a chain I didn't even recognize. The next morning, bleary-eyed, I scrolled through my phone. My sister had posted a picture on Facebook. Our father smiling, holding the pills I had just bought for him. Her caption read, "Taking care of Dad is a blessing. I'm so grateful I can be here for him." Thousands of likes, dozens of comments praising her as the perfect daughter. I stared at the screen, the knot in my stomach tightening. She wasn't even there last night. It was my money, my effort, my sleeplessness. And yet, she had claimed the credit. For a moment, I brushed it off. That's what family did, right? We shared burdens, blurred lines. But something about the way she smiled in that photo, about the effortless lies, nagged at me. Still, I ignored it, because admitting what it meant would shatter everything I believed about loyalty and blood ties. I wanted to believe that if I kept giving, if I kept being dependable, they would see me, love me, value me. That belief kept me moving, even as exhaustion dug into my bones and the numbers in my bank account dwindled. I thought sacrifice was proof of love. I thought sacrifice would be enough. But cracks began to show in ways I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, while helping my father pay bills, I saw his phone screen light up. It was a family group chat. I laughed softly, reaching out. "You finally figured out how to make one." He pulled the phone back too quickly, muttering, "Oh, it's nothing, just some silly thing." The screen went dark before I could see more. I remember the sting. Why wasn't I part of a family chat? Later that night, I asked him directly. He smiled thinly, eyes sharp. "You're imagining things. Don't be so paranoid." That was the first time he called me paranoid. The word sank into me, heavy and cutting. I had no proof, nothing to fight with, only the echo of his dismissal. Still, the unease lingered. I wanted to trust, but my instincts whispered something was deeply wrong. Weeks later, my suspicion was confirmed in the cruelest way. My best friend pulled me aside, her face hesitant. "I need to show you something. I don't know if I should, but you deserve to see." She handed me her phone. On the screen were screenshots from a group chat labeled family. My father, my sister, several relatives. All of them were there. I wasn't. Message after message scrolled before my eyes. My sister. She thinks she's the hero, but she's just a leech. My father. She spends money recklessly, but when I ask for help, she acts like she's the savior. Another cousin chimed in. She's pathetic, always trying to prove she's useful. My throat closed. My chest tightened. The people I had given everything for had reduced me to a joke, a burden, a parasite. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but instead I stood frozen, staring until the words blurred. It wasn't just betrayal, it was humiliation. Every sacrifice I had made, every late-night transfer, every silent tear I had wiped away. All of it was twisted into proof of my weakness. My friend reached out, touching my arm gently. "I'm sorry, I thought you should know." I nodded, but inside I was unraveling. The truth was undeniable now. My father and sister had not only taken from me, they had mocked me, erased me, rewritten me as the villain in their private theater. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The silence pressed heavy on me, every breath tight. I thought of all the moments I had defended them, all the excuses I had made. They weren't grateful. They weren't blind. They knew exactly what they were doing. I had spent years sacrificing myself, thinking love would earn me belonging. But love had been turned against me. My loyalty was the rope they tied around my neck. I thought the pain of that discovery was the end, that nothing could cut deeper. I was wrong, because I had yet to hear the words that would shatter me completely. The room was colder than I expected. The blinds were half closed, letting in strips of light that fell across the polished wooden table. My relatives filled the chairs, their whispers bouncing off the walls. I sat at the end, hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to ignore the weight of their eyes. When the lawyer entered with a thick envelope, the room fell silent. My father shifted forward, his expression unreadable. The words came like stones thrown against glass. "Your sister earned it." My father didn't look at me when he said it. He was staring proudly at her, as if I had never been in the room. The lawyer unfolded the will, reading line by line. The house, the savings, the investments, all of it was assigned to my sister. My chest tightened, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. I tried to swallow, but the air was thick. Then came the second blow. My name was mentioned only once, in a side note. The younger daughter has proven irresponsible with finances and should not be entrusted with further assets. The words blurred as the lawyer continued, but that line burned into me. Irresponsible, wasteful. I wanted to scream, to demand who had written that lie. But instead, I sat frozen, my nails digging into my palms. My sister smirked, her hand resting on our father's arm like a crown had just been placed on her head. The others glanced at me with thinly veiled disdain, as if the will had confirmed their suspicions. My mind spiraled. Who had crafted that false image of me? Who decided I was reckless when I was the one holding everything together? And was it my father, my sister, or both? I stared at the papers as though they might rewrite themselves, but they didn't. The betrayal was etched in ink. I thought of the years I had covered rent when my father was broke, the nights I stayed awake transferring money to cover his bills, the sacrifices I had made so my sister could graduate debt-free. And now, with a few carefully chosen words, I had been erased. The silence stretched. No one spoke for me. Not one relative defended me. In that moment, I realized I had been cast in their private play as the villain, the careless, selfish daughter who didn't deserve a place at the table. But beneath the humiliation, a spark flickered. If they saw me as weak, if they believed I was defeated, then maybe that was my advantage. I exhaled slowly and forced my face into neutrality. I would not argue, I would not beg. Let them think they had won. As the meeting ended, people stood, murmuring polite congratulations to my sister. My father avoided my eyes. I walked out without a word, my steps steady, even as my insides shook. They thought they had destroyed me, but I had just decided something important. I would not be their victim. That night, in the quiet of my apartment, I began. I pulled out old receipts, emails, and bank statements. Every transfer I had made to my father, every note of "thank you, sweetheart," saved in my phone. I started recording every call, saving every message. The work was tedious, exhausting, but it was fuel. Days passed. I checked my accounts, tracing the flow of money. And then I found it. A transaction that shouldn't have existed. Money I had sent to my father had ended up in my sister's personal account. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but then there was another and another. The betrayal sharpened into clarity. My father hadn't just been careless, he had been complicit. He had let my sister siphon my help, dressing her theft as his need. I sat at my desk, staring at the evidence, my stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to collapse under the weight of it. Another part, the part that had been silent in the lawyer's office, grew sharper, steadier. I wasn't ready to expose them, not yet. To move too quickly would give them time to twist the narrative again. Instead, I would wait. I would observe. I would let them underestimate me. For now, I played my role, the quiet, foolish daughter who had lost everything. But behind that mask, I was building something they couldn't see. I knew it was only a matter of time before someone else revealed themselves, someone who could help me piece together the truth. And when that ally finally appeared, everything would change. The silence of my apartment became my war room. Every night, I sat at my desk surrounded by stacks of paper, glowing screens, and the faint hum of my laptop. What once felt like chaos began to take the shape of strategy. I uploaded all my old emails, bank statements, and text messages into cloud storage, carefully organizing every document. I was building an archive of my life, a trail they thought I'd never follow. Technology became my ally. I downloaded an AI tool to analyze my father's signed documents. Line by line, signature by signature, it compared his authentic handwriting to the one in the will. The result chilled me. The will had been altered. My father's voice, recorded on countless late-night calls, was fed into another program to confirm tone patterns. What emerged wasn't just proof of manipulation, it was a map of betrayal. Still, I needed more. One evening, as I combed through my father's financial history, a message arrived from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She was an old acquaintance of my mother's, now working at the local bank. Her words were simple but heavy. "You should see something." We met in a small cafe, her eyes darting nervously as she slid an envelope across the table. Inside were copies of statements I had never seen. Hidden accounts, secret transfers, all leading to my sister. My breath caught as I scanned the pages. Not only had she been siphoning the money I sent, but my father knew. His name appeared on joint accounts, his signature confirming withdrawals. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined. They hadn't just stolen from me, They had done it together. My father, the man I thought I was saving, had been feeding from my sacrifice while handing the credit to my sister. I left the cafe in silence, the world around me suddenly sharper, crueler. The truth pressed against me like a weight. They had joined forces long before the will, weaving a story where I was expendable. For years I had believed I was the anchor of this family, but now I saw it clearly. I had been nothing more than a pawn in their game. I returned home, spread the papers on my desk, and stared at the patterns until my eyes burned. The anger was hot, but beneath it was something steadier, resolve. They wanted me blind, they wanted me silent, but I would not stay a pawn. Still, evidence was only one part of the battle. I needed people who could stand beside me. The first was a lawyer, recommended by a colleague. I expected him to turn me away. I couldn't afford his fees. But after hearing my story, he leaned forward, his expression grave. "This case deserves daylight," he said. "I'll take it pro bono." For the first time in weeks, a flicker of hope sparked inside me. Next came my therapist. I had begun seeing her in secret after the will reading, when the walls of my life seemed to collapse. She didn't give me answers, but she gave me tools. How to control the flood of emotions, how to hold steady under pressure, how to use silence as power. Each session built armor I hadn't realized I needed. Then, in the most unexpected way, came a stranger. One night, scrolling through Reddit, I stumbled upon a thread about toxic families. I typed a comment, just a fragment of my experience, and left it there. Days later, a private message appeared. The sender claimed they knew my father. Skeptical, I hesitated, but curiosity pulled me in. Attached was a video clip. In it, my father laughed, drink in hand, surrounded by acquaintances. His words were slurred but clear. I finally cut the dead weight. That ungrateful daughter won't get a dime. I made sure of it. The people around him laughed, raising glasses. My hands shook as I replayed it again and again. There it was, proof of intent, proof of cruelty. Not just financial betrayal, but the pride he took in erasing me. For a long moment, I couldn't move. Tears blurred my vision, a mix of rage and validation. He hadn't just lied, he had bragged. He had turned my suffering into a joke. But in that moment of pain, hope sharpened into clarity. I wasn't alone anymore. I had allies, evidence, and something stronger than their manipulation. Truth. I closed my laptop, exhaled deeply, and let the silence settle. The pieces were in place. The lies were unraveling. I finally understood. This wasn't just survival. This was war. And war required timing. Now all that remained was to choose the perfect moment to strike. The wedding hall glittered with chandeliers and laughter. Music swirled through the air as guests raised their glasses, their eyes fixed on my sister in her pristine white gown. I sat near the back, the seat no one cared to fill, my presence reduced to an afterthought. To them, I was an outsider, a guest in a family I had once carried on my shoulders. My sister floated through the room like a queen, her smile radiant, her arm looped through her new husband's. My father stood nearby, his face swollen with pride. Every detail of the evening was meant to showcase their victory. I was the discarded daughter, forced to watch as they celebrated the wealth and legacy stolen from me. But they didn't know what was coming. Beneath my calm exterior, I was counting the minutes. When the lights dimmed for the toast, I rose quietly. My footsteps echoed as I approached the front. A few heads turned, confused. My sister's smile faltered as she caught sight of me. I stopped by the projector, my hand steady. "I'd like to say a few words," I announced, my voice cutting through the chatter. Before anyone could object, the screen flickered to life. At first, it showed nothing but darkness. Then the image sharpened. My father, drink in hand, laughing. His voice filled the hall. I finally cut the dead weight. That ungrateful daughter won't get a dime. I made sure of it. The guests froze. Murmurs rippled across the room. My father's laughter echoed, cruel and triumphant, before the clip ended abruptly. Gasps erupted. My sister's eyes widened in horror. The hall that had moments ago been filled with joy now swelled with unease. I stood still, letting the silence sink in. Then the whispers began. Did he really say that? To his own daughter? What kind of father? My father shot up, his face red. "That video is taken out of context," he barked. But the crowd wasn't convinced. People turned their eyes toward him, judgment heavy in their stares. My sister stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Dad, how could you?" But he cut her off, his anger misdirected. "You think you're innocent? Don't forget who's been spending the money. You took it all." His voice cracked with fury. The room tilted into chaos. My sister's composure broke. Tears streaked down her makeup. "Don't put this on me. You told me it was fine. You signed off on everything. You're the one who wanted her out." Her sobs shook the microphone as the guests whispered louder, some in disbelief, others already condemning. The spectacle was unraveling faster than I had imagined. Years of deceit, hidden behind smiles and shallow words, came spilling into the open under the pressure of exposure. Then came the final twist. The lawyer who had drafted my father's will, a man who had stood silently at his side for years, stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "I've seen the documents, I've seen the signatures, and I can confirm what he nodded toward me, is saying is true. The will was manipulated. The financial transfers are real." The hall erupted in gasps again. My father's face drained of color. My sister's sobs turned into wails. The guests, once enchanted by their facade, now recoiled, murmuring with disgust. I stood quietly, letting their world implode. It wasn't anger that steadied me, it was clarity. For the first time, I wasn't the daughter scrambling to fix their mess. I was the witness to their undoing. Some relatives turned their eyes toward me, guilt etched into their faces. They remembered every time they had called me paranoid, every time they had believed the lies. Others avoided my gaze altogether, ashamed of their silence. But I didn't need their validation. I had already won the moment I stopped trying to prove myself to them. The chaos raged on, my father shouting, my sister begging, the guests whispering, as if they had stumbled into a tragedy. I simply walked back to my seat, calm amid the storm. And as I sat down, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The wedding that was meant to celebrate their triumph had become the stage for their downfall. Yet I knew this was not the end. The video was only the first cut, the opening act of a much larger reckoning. Because when the dust finally settled, it wouldn't just be about shame, it would be about justice. The wedding had collapsed into chaos, but that was only the beginning. Public humiliation was a spark, but I wanted more than scandal. I wanted the truth written into law, carved into records no one could erase. The next morning, I met my lawyer in his office. Papers covered his desk, evidence neatly stacked into folders. "We have enough to move forward," he said, his tone steady. "It's time to take this to court." Filing the lawsuit felt like crossing an invisible line. For years, I had been the silent helper, the daughter who cleaned up behind everyone else. Now I was dragging their secrets into the light, stripping away every shield they had built. The legal process began slowly, motions filed, hearings scheduled, but the weight of it pressed down on them immediately. At first, my father dismissed it as a tantrum. "She'll get tired," he told the family. But then the letters arrived, official, stamped, impossible to ignore. His confident facade began to crack. My sister's friends, once eager to bask in her glow, started pulling away, whispering behind her back. I saw it in their eyes: doubt, suspicion, disgust. And then came the twist I hadn't expected. The tax authorities, alerted by the lawsuit and the sudden attention on my father's finances, launched their own investigation. Years of hidden income, unreported assets, and false filings unraveled under scrutiny. The man who had called me reckless was now facing charges for fraud. The irony was bitter and sweet all at once. He had built his power on lies, but those lies were turning into shackles. My sister, tangled in the web of stolen funds, was stripped of her inheritance rights. The bank froze accounts linked to her, and her social circle, once dazzled by her image, dropped her without hesitation. The same people who toasted her at the wedding now called her a thief. Watching them fall should have filled me with triumph, and for a moment it did. But the satisfaction was sharper, more complicated. Justice wasn't a single blow. It was a slow, grinding machine, and I was watching it crush the people who had once crushed me. Still, as I stood in the courthouse hallway, hearing the murmurs of reporters and strangers, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't about seeing them stripped of wealth or status. It was about reclaiming something they had tried to erase: my dignity, my truth. I didn't want their money anymore. I didn't want their house, their assets, their scraps. All I wanted was to stand tall, no longer defined by their lies. And then another ripple spread. One by one, others began to speak. A cousin approached me, shame flickering in her eyes. "I thought I was the only one," she whispered. She confessed how my father had pressured her into signing documents years ago, manipulating her inheritance. A former colleague of his reached out anonymously, sharing stories of bribes and cover-ups. Even an old family friend stepped forward, recalling nights when my father mocked me in private, while boasting about how easily he could control people. The web of manipulation was wider than I ever imagined. My story had cracked the dam, and now the flood was unstoppable. Strangers reached out to me online, some who had seen the viral video from the wedding, others who had followed the court case. They told me their own stories, different names, different faces, but the same poison running through their families. "You gave me courage," one message read, "because if you can stand against them, maybe I can too." I never expected to become a symbol. I had only wanted to protect myself, to claw back what little remained of my life. But in fighting for my truth, I had opened a door for others. Their voices joined mine, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. There was healing in that, not the kind that erases scars, but the kind that makes them shine like proof of survival. I wasn't the weak daughter anymore, nor the expendable pawn. I was the proof that their power was built on lies, and that lies crumble under light. As the lawsuit advanced, the courtroom filled with faces, some hostile, some supportive, some simply curious. But when I stood there, presenting my evidence, I felt steady. For once, the silence wasn't suffocating, it was power. Yet even in victory, a question lingered, quiet but insistent. I had dismantled their empire, stripped them of their masks, reclaimed my truth. But when the dust settled, when the noise of the courtroom faded and the cameras turned away, what would my life look like without them? I had lived so long inside their shadows. What would it mean to finally step into the light? The court battles were over. The scandals had burned their way through every corner of the family tree, and the dust had finally begun to settle. For the first time in my life, I had the chance to breathe without waiting for the next blow. But peace doesn't come by accident. It has to be built, brick by brick, with boundaries as its foundation. I started with silence. No more answering late-night calls. No more rescuing anyone from debts that weren't mine. No more justifying myself to people who thrived on my pain. I chose no contact. It wasn't easy. There were days my phone lit up with messages from distant relatives demanding I reconcile, accusing me of cruelty. I ignored them, and then one day, my father called. His voice was thin, nothing like the commanding man I had grown up with. "Please," he whispered, "the bankruptcy court is stripping everything. I don't know where to turn." For a moment, the old instinct stirred. The daughter who always ran to his aid, who emptied her bank account to keep him afloat. But that girl no longer existed. I listened in silence, and when he finally begged, "Help me," I replied softly, "I can't." There was no hatred in my voice, no rage, only clarity. I hung up, and the weight I'd carried for decades slid off my shoulders. That was the moment I realized I was truly free. Freedom, however, wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the ability to build a life of my own choosing. I decided my story wouldn't end in survival. It would begin in creation. I recorded the first episode of my podcast on a rainy Thursday night. Sitting alone with a cheap microphone and the courage I had pieced together through years of scars. I titled it "When Family Hurts." My voice shook as I spoke, but I told the truth. The late-night calls, the betrayal, the will, the courtroom. By the time I uploaded it, I almost deleted it, afraid of what strangers might think. Within days, thousands listened. Messages poured in from people across the country. They weren't strangers anymore. They were survivors like me. Women who had been written out of inheritances, men whose parents drained them dry, siblings cast aside for golden children. "I thought I was alone," one wrote. "Hearing you gave me strength." What began as a whisper grew into a chorus. I was invited to speak on panels, to write articles, to stand in front of audiences who wanted to understand the hidden world of toxic families. I never planned on becoming an advocate, but life has a way of reshaping us when we step into the light. And then came the message that undid me in the most unexpected way. A young woman wrote, "I was ready to give up. My family had convinced me I was worthless, that I didn't deserve to live. But then I heard your story. You didn't just survive, you fought. And because of that, I decided to stay. You saved me." I read those words over and over, tears falling freely. For years, I had believed my life had been wasted in sacrifice. But now my scars were saving someone else. That was the final twist I hadn't seen coming. Not the downfall of my father or the disgrace of my sister, but the transformation of my pain into someone else's hope. I no longer measured my worth by the approval of people who sought to destroy me. My worth was in the life I was building, in the voices I helped amplify, in the community I was creating from ashes. The future stretched wide before me, not bound by old roles or suffocating expectations. I was no longer the scapegoat, the forgotten daughter, the expendable pawn. I was the author of my story. And so, as I closed my journal one evening, I wrote the words I had waited my entire life to believe. I am free. I am whole. I am more than what they tried to make me. I didn't just survive. I thrived. And in thriving, I lit the way for others to follow.